On Tuesday the 7th of May in 2019, a 27-year-old woman named Paige Coffey was spotted with her abusive ex-boyfriend PJ Mason on a Home Depot surveillance camera in Cleveland, Ohio, before she would mysteriously disappear. In the weeks building up, Paige had been ignoring her family's phone calls, leading them to report her missing to the police. But when they found out that she was last seen with the same man that had put her in the hospital on multiple occasions, they began to fear the worst. However, an incompetent police department would later come out to say that despite her recent association with an ex-convict and serial abuser, they had no reason to believe that foul play was involved, and even went as far as to say that she could have been relaxing on a beach somewhere. But nonetheless, after the family continued to plead for help, an investigation would eventually begin, with the police discovering several pieces of incriminating evidence that linked back to PJ, such as the fact that he had set fire to his own car and lied about the last time he saw Paige. But despite these discoveries, he was never officially named as a suspect. So, to this day, Paige's family are still fighting for justice, as they believe that she would have never left home without saying goodbye, and therefore, 5 years on from her disappearance, they are only left to wonder what really happened to Paige Coffey, and more importantly, who could be responsible. Paige Noelle Natasha Coffey was born in the early 90s to her devoted mother Trinetta Williamson in the city of Cleveland, Ohio, alongside the rest of her loving family. Little is known about her childhood, but what we do know is that she attended Charles F. Brush High School, where she would later graduate in 2010 and quickly set her sights on becoming a fashion designer. According to her family, Paige was an incredibly creative person, so it was no surprise when she decided to enroll at Youngstown State University to study fashion merchandise, where she would later graduate in 2012 with a GPA of 3.1. But alongside her creativity, Paige also had a rather spontaneous streak, as well as a romantic side, which would eventually lead her to accept a proposal from her high school sweetheart, with the two deciding to get married later that year. However, her now husband was enlisted in the army, and therefore this meant that the two would have to leave their hometown of Cleveland, eventually settling in his assigned base of Hawaii, where they would officially start their life together as a married couple. At first, their relationship was like something out of a movie, and although her mother Trinetta was initially against their decision to marry at such a young age, she would eventually come around to the idea, given that Paige's husband was quickly growing into a dependable and mature provider. But unfortunately, due to the distance that now separated the young couple from their families, the pressure began to take its toll, and after 4 years of marriage, the two eventually decided it would be for the best to call it quits, with Paige deciding to head back to her hometown of Cleveland to reunite with her family. Soon after returning home, Paige then began to look for work, but given her lack of experience, it was difficult to find anything related to her passion. So given her challenging situation, she eventually made the decision to enroll herself at Lakewood Community College to study pharmacy technology with the hopes of landing a job upon graduation. However, it wouldn't be long before this once vibrant and driven woman would soon begin to lose her spark, after she met a man named Patrick Mason Jr., otherwise known as PJ, who would quickly reveal himself to be nothing less than a cancer on her life. According to her family, almost immediately after the pair began seeing each other, they noticed a sudden change in Paige's behaviour, with her once bubbly personality being replaced with a more subdued and closed-off demeanour that led her family to worry she may have been going down a bad path. Paige would begin to ignore her family's messages and would sometimes go weeks without calling her mother, which was extremely odd given that just a year prior she was somebody that would be in constant contact with her friends and family. So, noticing that there may have been something going on, they would go on to ask Paige if she was okay and if there was anything they could do to help. But in response, she simply told them that she was always breaking or losing her phone, to which her family would offer to buy her a new one so they could remain in contact. But time and time again, this pattern of silence would continue to repeat itself, with Paige eventually coming clean to her friends that her boyfriend PJ was becoming incredibly controlling and possessive, as he wouldn't allow her to have a job or drive a car, leaving her isolated and utterly dependent on him. However, despite her awareness of the situation she was in, for one reason or another, Paige refused to walk away from the relationship, and the pair continued to date for almost 2 years before a troubling incident would occur, when Paige's mother Trinetta would receive a message from PJ that would send shockwaves throughout the entire family. At some point in the early months of 2019, Trinetta Williamson was left startled to hear a knock at her door, and upon answering was greeted by a Cleveland police officer who was asking to speak with Paige. Surprised by this request, Trinetta then explained that she hadn't spoken to her daughter in the last few days, and that she was likely staying with her boyfriend at the time. But curious to know what the police wanted, Trinetta then asked why they needed to speak with Paige, and in response, the officer explained that her purse had been found on the side of a highway and that they had a few questions around the nature of this discovery. So, keen to assist, Trinetta then offered to call Paige on their behalf to see if she could find out where she was. But in typical fashion, Paige ignored her calls, eventually resulting in the police officer noting down the number and taking it back to the station. However, what had already started as a strange day would soon begin to get progressively worse, as the concerned mother would later receive a text message from Paige's boyfriend PJ, who was claiming that she had shot him in the head, followed by a photo of the wound and an image of a confession written by Paige herself. So, concerned for her daughter's safety, Trinetta then called the Cleveland police to ask them to inspect the situation, at which point the officers would then quickly arrive on the scene to arrest both Paige and PJ. But upon bringing her in, it was quickly discovered that Paige had been suffering from a mental episode, and that her actions likely were the result of a bipolar disorder, which explained why she was acting so hysterical during her psychiatric evaluation. But the true events of that day would soon reveal themselves, when Paige turned to her mother in the hospital and confessed that PJ had forced her to write the confession note at gunpoint, and that he had pulled the trigger on himself, also going on to say that she had been trying to leave the relationship, but that it wasn't easy. However, despite knowing how toxic the relationship had become, and after promising her friends and family that she would not be seeing PJ ever again, this would unfortunately not be the final time that she would cross paths with her ex-boyfriend. On Monday the 29th of April, Trinetta Williamson would receive a request from her daughter, who was asking if she could get a lift into town as she had plans to meet up with some friends. So, more than happy to help out, Trinetta agreed, and the two climbed into the car together in the direction of Oakwood Village, where Paige had planned to go shopping. However, little did Trinetta know at the time that this seemingly innocent request couldn't have been further from the truth, as it would later be revealed that Paige had actually planned on meeting up with PJ and knew that her mother would have never approved. But to make matters even more troubling, the next day Paige would once again do something extremely out of character when she texted her mother to send her $30 via Cash App, which was certainly not something she would usually do. So, concerned that this must have meant that her daughter really needed the money, Trinetta didn't hesitate to send it across and continued on with her day as normal. However, little did she know that this would be the final time she would ever speak to her daughter, as just a week later, Paige Coffey would suddenly disappear on that fateful day in May. On Sunday the 5th of May, an old work colleague of Paige's would spontaneously decide to get in touch with her friend, as it had been a while since they had last spoken and she wanted to catch up. But as she was unable to get in touch with Paige directly, she felt she had no other option than to call Paige's mother Trinetta, as the lack of communication had started to cause some concern. So after speaking with Trinetta over the phone, it was agreed that she would try and get in touch with Paige herself to let her know that a concerned friend was looking to get in touch. But just as before, Paige would refuse to answer the phone, and every text message would continue to get ignored. So, given the worrying circumstances, Trinetta decided to call the Cleveland PD to ask them to check up on her daughter, and given their knowledge of Paige and her unstable mental health, they agreed to do some research. At which point it was discovered that Paige had been staying with her ex-boyfriend in a cheap motel in Coakley Township, and that the pair had been kicked out for an unknown reason. Now, this information was incredibly worrying to Trinetta, as she knew how dangerous PJ was, so the fact that Paige had been seen with this man was extremely troubling to say the least. But given the fact that she was alive and well, and at an age where she was able to make her own choices, there was unfortunately nothing Trinetta could do. But as the days went by, with Paige continuing to ignore everybody's attempts to get in touch, the situation would only seem to escalate, and the fear that surrounded the situation would eventually come to a head on the 12th of May, when for the first time in her life, Paige would fail to wish Trinetta a happy Mother's Day, leading the family to panic that their loved one may have been in grave danger. So, after waiting a few more days, the family eventually decided that they had no other option than to officially report Paige Coffey as missing and endangered to the Cleveland Police Department. On Thursday the 16th of May, after waiting several days for an update on her daughter's disappearance, Trinetta Williamson was eventually forced to make a phone call to Paige's ex-boyfriend PJ, as by now she was certain that he would have known where her daughter was. However, to her surprise, not only did PJ answer the phone, but he would go on to explain that he had no idea where she was, and that he hadn't seen Paige for months, despite the fact that he was reportedly seen with her less than 2 weeks prior at a motel in Copley Township. So in response, Trinetta then confronted PJ about how she was recently seen with a man matching his description, hoping he would fold and reveal the truth. But holding firm, PJ remained certain that he had not seen Paige for a while, and that he was unfortunately unable to help, before abruptly hanging up the phone. So, without any new information, the case continued to run cold, up until 4 days later when a friend of Paige's named Vanessa offered to call PJ herself to see if she could pull any more information out of him, and upon answering the phone, the two immediately got into the detail of their last moments together, which raised some red flags to say the least. According to PJ, he had texted her a few times, but she was apparently talking like a crazy person, and eventually she had decided to change her phone number, which conveniently explained why nobody could get in touch with her. PJ then went on to add, he had no idea where she was and couldn't remember how long ago they had broken up, stating that he may have last seen her downtown but couldn't be sure. So, given the vagueness of his answers, the scope of blame was only further solidified as far as Paige's family were concerned, as from this conversation it seemed like PJ was deliberately holding back information as to not bring any more suspicion upon himself. So, keen to raise the alarms with the police, Paige's family then pleaded with the officers to investigate PJ, as they were certain he had done something to their loved one. And in response, they explained how this was currently impossible as they had no hard evidence against him, but as a consolation, they did agree to hold a press conference to help raise some more awareness for the case. However, what was supposed to be a defining moment in the journey of discovery would later reveal itself to be nothing more than a hindrance, as the police would go on to make some incredibly controversial remarks during this event that would leave the entire family utterly speechless. On Tuesday the 18th of February, around 9 months after Paige's initial disappearance, the Bracknell Police Department, who were working alongside the Cleveland PD, would call a press conference to announce the disappearance of Paige Coffey, with the aim of spreading her image to the public to help create some new leads. During the event, an officer would reveal how Paige was last seen walking inside of a Home Depot in the small village of Bracknell, Ohio, alongside a man who matched the description of her ex-boyfriend, PJ Mason. It was then explained that this was the last official sighting of Paige, as after leaving the store, she was never seen or heard from again, which created some fear within the community that something dangerous may have occurred. However, despite the fact that the police were aware of PJ's past convictions, they almost seemed to play down the sense of danger by expressing how it was very possible that Paige could just be relaxing on a beach somewhere for all they knew, which, as you can imagine, caused a great deal of frustration within the family. In response, Paige's auntie stepped up to the microphone to explain how Paige would have never just disappeared without any contact with her family, and that even during her tough times, Paige would always find a way to communicate that she was okay. So the fact that she had been missing for 9 months without so much as a text message was incredibly worrying, to say the least. The police then followed up by detailing some of their efforts so far in the investigations, such as how they had conducted a few searches in the area and had followed up on numerous leads, But ultimately, their efforts had been unsuccessful, which is why they required the public's help, even going as far as to offer a $5,000 reward for anybody that had information on the disappearance. However, despite the numerous attempts to raise awareness, the months would continue to go by with no suspects being brought into question. All the while, PJ was still up to his antics, eventually landing himself in prison for an assault on his new girlfriend. So unfortunately, to this day, we still have no idea what really happened to Paige Coffey, which has understandably caused her family a great deal of pain over the years, as they patiently wait for the closure that continues to elude them. Now, unfortunately, as far as the official investigation goes, this is all we know for now. But Paige's family remain hopeful that the truth will eventually reveal itself, whether that means finding the guilty suspect or being reunited with their loved one. So until that day comes, I feel we all must continue to spread awareness in any way we can, as I personally believe that the support of the public can be an incredibly powerful tool in any missing person case. However, given that Paige Coffey has now been missing for over 5 years, alongside the concerning details of her case, I can't help but feel that the likelihood of her safe return is only growing weaker as the time passes. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, to kick things off, based on the information available, I find it very difficult to envisage any kind of conclusion here that isn't related to Paige's ex-boyfriend PJ, at least to some degree. Not only was he the last person seen with her, but he also lied to Paige's mother about when he had last spoken to her, claiming that it had been months prior when it was in fact just a few days, according to the conversation he had with Paige's friend Vanessa. But on top of this, he was also a convicted felon who possessed a lengthy criminal history consisting of several traffic-related offences, multiple robbery attempts, convictions for domestic violence, and he was even arrested for using a weapon to make someone fear for their safety, otherwise known as menacing. And so it would be safe to say that this long rap sheet had resulted in quite a few prison stints over the years. However, the controversy still doesn't end there, as PJ was also said to have burned his own car in an attempt to hide evidence, with the police being unable to trace its location after Paige went missing. Now, he claimed to have sold the vehicle to a friend, but there was never any proof of this and no receipts were ever found, so it is therefore impossible to say for certain what really happened here. But one thing that is for sure is that PJ wasn't just a menace to society, but he was also hated by his own family, as during the investigation, several of his own family members spoke to the police about his antics and how they were concerned for Paige's safety, showing just how heartless this man really was. Not to mention the fact that Paige would confess to one of her friends over text that during their relationship, PJ had apparently strangled, shot at, stabbed, beat, burned, raped, and embarrassed her numerous times, but due to her low self-esteem and lack of options, she was forced to stay. Now, I'm sure many of you will have your own opinions on this decision, but we have to keep in mind that this is a far from uncommon circumstance, as thousands of women continue to struggle when escaping abusive relationships, whether that be due to threats against their lives or their loved ones' lives, or even just a deep-set psychological manipulation that compels them to stay. But either way, I personally believe that domestic abuse victims should never be blamed for the actions of their abusers. And so with this in mind, I hope that you will please be respectful in the comments, as no matter what happened here, Paige was certainly a victim, and therefore deserves our sympathy and support. However, despite the mass amounts of evidence against PJ, for whatever reason he has still not been convicted of anything, and the police haven't even named him as a key suspect. So based on this, could it be possible that Paige actually left on her own accord? Well, her family certainly don't seem to think so, as they came out publicly to argue how Paige would never do something like this. But given the fact that she was struggling to escape an abusive relationship, I suppose it's possible that she could have decided to run away from home in an attempt to break free from PJ. But if this was the case, where could she have gone? And why has nobody heard from her in over 5 years now? Well, one popular theory online is that she could have somehow got herself mixed up in human trafficking, although personally I don't feel there is too much credence to this theory, especially given that there is not one shred of evidence to support it. But I suppose it could be possible that Paige was just trying to move on with her life when she came into contact with somebody who had intentions to harm her. If this was the case, the key suspect for such a crime would likely be PJ, but if for argument's sake he is innocent, surely there must be somebody else at fault for her disappearance. Now at this point I must stress that there is no hard evidence for this next theory, but nonetheless, I feel it's something worth mentioning given the fact that we still have no answers after such a long time. But what if Paige has not been seen in 5 years, because after her life was taken, her body was then dumped in a nearby river or waterway? The town she was last seen in is located right on the coast of Lake Erie. Plus, the Grand River also isn't located too far from the Home Depot where she was last spotted on the surveillance camera. So, given these troubling details, I suppose it's possible that she could have ended up a victim, like so many others have in the state of Ohio in recent years. Now, out of respect for Paige's family, I think that's about as far as I'm willing to go with the theories, as at the end of the day they are nothing more than speculation. But I do hope that these are angles that the police have taken, as after searching for 5 years, I believe every single avenue needs to be explored in order to get to the bottom of this mystery, so Paige's family can get the closure they so desperately deserve, once and for all. But just before I end the video, I wanted to quickly mention another case that I covered last week, which honestly contains some seriously concerning similarities to Paige's case, that I'm sure you will agree are well worth looking into by the authorities as well. Now, if you're a subscriber of my channel, then you will likely already be aware of the many cases I've covered involving missing women, but for those of you who aren't familiar, I will just provide a quick rundown of one of those stories for context. So, on Saturday the 26th of June, around 2 years after Paige Coffey went missing, a 27-year-old black woman named Rajah McQueen was captured on a gas station surveillance camera getting into her car in Cleveland, Ohio, but to this day she has not been seen since. Around 4 hours later, her vehicle was spotted on the other side of town, but after enhancing the image, the authorities noticed that Rajah wasn't in the car, and that the license plate had been changed. But after further examination, it was revealed that the car was being driven by an unidentified man, who was later revealed to be a possible ex-boyfriend, and bullet holes were clearly visible on the passenger side door, leading the police to worry that Rajah may have been in serious trouble. However, after searching for months and tracking down this suspect, he was mysteriously released after conducting the interview, despite the fact that the police could not locate the stolen vehicle, and friends of Rajah claimed that this man was abusive towards her in the past. So, just like in the case of Paige Coffey, we have another 27-year-old black woman who is last seen with an abusive ex-boyfriend on a surveillance camera in the city of Cleveland, Ohio. Also, both women were close with their families and would never disappear without telling their loved ones first. And both women have been missing now for multiple years, with not a single suspect being convicted over their disappearances. So with these similarities in mind, could we potentially have a serial killer on our hands? Or is Cleveland, Ohio just an incredibly dangerous place to be if you are a woman of colour? Personally, I'm more leaning towards the latter, but regardless of why these women keep disappearing, this should surely be a warning sign to the police departments of Ohio to step up their efforts when it comes to missing person cases, because I fear that if nothing gets done, it won't be long before we see another innocent victim disappear in Cleveland, leaving yet another family with heartbreak as they grieve the loss of their loved one. Anyway, with that, I think I'll leave this video here. But if you have any other theories of your own which you think may help explain what happened to Paige Coffey, please leave your ideas in the comments down below, and as always, please try your best to be as respectful as possible. But until next time, thank you so much for watching, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for updates on these stories. Also, if you would like to hear more about some of the other cases that I mentioned in this video, such as Rajah McQueen, feel free to check out the videos on screen now.